Shedeur Sanders starts tomorrow, and Ryan Clark is pulling no punches. The truth he's about to drop will turn heads.
There's no way you put Shedeur Sanders out there this week with this sorry group of people around him and then expect him to play well.
And somebody is put out there and looks completely lost from the quarterback position, who is a QB too. What am I to make of that? What are we to make of that? Could you educate us about that? Because I don't know anywhere else to go.
But what I'm saying is life ain't fair, right? I'm saying that is the fair thing to think. And I'm telling you this from a dude that wasn't drafted. I knew that when I got my shot, it didn't matter what was going on around me, that my film had to be hot. Right. My film had to be a thing, because I'm not being judged like the other people around me, whether that's fair or not.
Sure. This is a make or break situation for Shadeur, and it is unfortunate. And to Ryan Clark's point, it is one of those things where, like, bro, you have to make sure that the film that you put out there has to be sizzling.
Cleveland is on fire. Ryan Clark knows something that most people watching from home don't understand. He lived it. He breathed it. He survived it. The NFL doesn't care about your story. It doesn't care about fairness, and it damn sure doesn't care about excuses. That's the message Clark is hammering home as Shedeur Sanders prepares for the biggest game of his young career, his first NFL start against the Raiders this Sunday. While analysts like Dan Orlovsky are talking about context and circumstances, while Stephen A. Smith is questioning whether Cleveland has sabotaged the kid, Ryan Clark is cutting through all the noise with a truth that's harder to swallow than any of them want to admit.
I knew that when I got my shot, it didn't matter what was going on around me, that my film had to be hot. Right. My film had to be a thing, because I'm not being judged like the other people around me, whether that's fair or not.
Sure. Clark gets it because he's been there. An undrafted free agent who had to claw his way into the league, who never got the luxury of making excuses, who understood from day one that nobody was going to give him anything. Every snap was an audition. Every game was a test he couldn't afford to fail. And that's exactly where Shedeur Sanders finds himself right now.
Now, what you and I and Cam know is when you're drafted in the 5th round, you're treated like a 5th rounder.
Right. That's not cynicism. That's not being harsh. That's just how the machine works. And Clark knows that better than anyone on that panel, because he lived through worse. He wasn't even drafted. He had to prove himself when nobody believed in him, when nobody knew his name, when one bad game could have ended his career before it started. So when Stephen A. starts talking about how Shedeur wasn't put in a position to succeed, about how he didn't get first-team reps, about how Kevin Stefanski should have prepared him better, Clark doesn't disagree with the facts. He just knows that those facts don't matter. Not to the people making decisions, not to the coaches evaluating film, not to the front office deciding whether to stick with this kid or go back to Dylan Gabriel.
I don't believe he was put in a position to succeed the other day. I don't believe he's been put in a position to succeed with the Cleveland Browns.
Stephen A. is right about the circumstances. The Baltimore game was a disaster. 4 of 16 passing, 47 yards, a passer rating of 13.5 that makes you wince just reading it. Shedeur looked lost. He looked unprepared. He looked exactly like a backup quarterback who got thrown into a game with zero chemistry and zero preparation time. But here's what Clark is pushing back on. Does any of that actually matter when it comes to Shedeur's future? The answer is no. And that's the brutal truth that's hard for people to accept. Because in the NFL, you don't get graded on a curve. You don't get extra credit for difficult circumstances. You get judged on what shows up on film, period. And if that film doesn't show competence, doesn't show potential, doesn't show that you belong, then you're done. It doesn't matter if you only had 1 week of practice. It doesn't matter if your receivers can't catch. It doesn't matter if your offensive line is getting destroyed. Your film has to be hot. That's what Clark said. And that's what separates guys who make it from guys who become footnotes. Cam Newton backed this perspective with his own analysis of what Shedeur is facing. And Cam knows pressure. He walked into the league as a #1 overall pick and torched Arizona for over 400 yards in his debut. But even Cam acknowledges that Shedeur's situation is different, more precarious, more unforgiving.
And then what people aren't saying, this is the same coach that was not saying his name in the media for a substantial amount of time too.
That's the political side of this that Clark and others are acknowledging. There's something off about how Cleveland has handled Shedeur. The lack of reps, the silence from Stefanski, the way he was thrown into the Baltimore game and then immediately told that Dillon Gabriel was still the starter once Gabriel cleared concussion protocol. It all points to a franchise that isn't fully invested in Shedeur's success. And that's where Stephen A's frustration comes from. When you have a two-time Coach of the Year and a fifth-round quarterback who looks that unprepared in his debut, it raises questions. Legitimate questions about whether this kid is getting a fair shake. But Clark's perspective cuts deeper than the politics. He's not denying that the situation is unfair. He's saying it doesn't matter whether it's fair or not.
And I don't feel like Shedeur Sanders is sitting in the spot where we're looking at all things equal.
That's the crux of it. Shedeur isn't being evaluated on an even playing field. He's being judged more harshly because of his draft position, because of his famous last name, because of all the hype and controversy that followed him from Colorado to Cleveland. The standards are higher, the margin for error is smaller, and the consequences of failure are immediate. So what does Clark think Shedeur needs to do Sunday against the Raiders? Simple. He needs to show up on film. He needs to make the routine plays. He needs to demonstrate the fundamentals that NFL quarterbacks are expected to execute, regardless of the talent around them.
He has to go out and do all the little things that no matter what people say about Dillon Gabriel, he was able to do. Get it out of his hands, be quick with his reads, anticipate, right? He was able to do some of those things in the short field.
That's the baseline. Quick decisions, accurate throws on short and intermediate routes, taking care of the ball, managing the game even if you're not lighting up the scoreboard. Dillon Gabriel wasn't spectacular, but he was competent. He got the ball out fast. He made the easy throws. He didn't turn it over at a catastrophic rate. If Shedeur can match that, just match it, not exceed it, he survives another week. But here's the kicker that Clark understands. Matching Dillon Gabriel might not be enough to actually win the starting job long term, because if you're just as good as the guy who got benched, why make the switch permanent? That's why Cam Newton added another layer to this analysis. The film has to be sizzling, not just adequate, not just competent. It has to show something special, something that makes the coaches in front office believe this kid is worth building around.
It is one of those things where, like, bro, you have to make sure that the film that you put out there has to be sizzling. Because if it's not, somebody's going to say, see, look at your boy. I told you he wasn't no different. I mean, look.
That's the political reality mixing with the football reality. Shedeur has critics waiting to pounce. People who didn't think he deserved to be drafted in the third round, let alone start NFL games. People who think the hype around him was manufactured because of his last name. One bad performance, and those voices get louder. One disaster game, and the narrative becomes, "See, we told you so." Dan Orlovsky tried to push back against this narrative during the debate, arguing that the expectations are unrealistic. The Cleveland has the worst skill position group in the NFL. Jerry Jeudy is mentally checked out, giving 7-word answers at press conferences like he's already given up on the season. The offensive line has been inconsistent. The running game is not existent. How is any quarterback supposed to thrive in that environment, let alone a rookie making his first career start? It's a valid question. And Orlovsky is right that we shouldn't expect Shedeur to look like Cam Newton against Arizona or any other legendary debut performance. The pieces around him simply aren't good enough. But Clark's response to that argument is devastating in its simplicity. It doesn't matter. Because when you're fighting for your career, when you're trying to prove you belong, when you're a 5th-round pick that everyone doubted, you have to be the guy who makes something out of nothing. You have to show on film that you're too talented, too smart, too composed to fail regardless of what's happening around you. That's harsh. That's unfair. But that's the standard. And Clark knows this because he lived it. So when Stephen A starts talking about how Cleveland is a house divided, when he questions whether Stefanski is intentionally setting Shedeur to fail, Clark doesn't dismiss it. He just knows that even if it's true, Shedeur can't use it as an excuse.
I view the Cleveland Browns as a house divided, where whether it's the offensive coordinator and the head coach having a different view than the GM and the owner or whatever it is. I don't know what the hell is going on, but I don't believe he's in a place where collectively they are doing everything that they can to ensure his success.
That's probably accurate. NFL teams have internal politics. GMs draft guys that coaches don't want. Coaches start guys that ownership questions. Front offices leak information to pressure coaching staffs. It happens all the time. But from Clark's perspective, that's just more noise Shedeur has to tune out. Because Sunday in Vegas, none of that matters. The only thing that matters is what shows up on tape. Can he command the huddle? Can he make his reads? Can he execute the game plan? Can he show poise under pressure? If the answer is yes, he gets another week. If the answer is no, Dillon Gabriel takes his job back and Shedeur becomes a clipboard holder waiting for another team to give him a chance years down the line. That's the make or break reality that everyone on the panel agrees on, even if they disagree about how fair it is. This isn't a long-term evaluation. This isn't the Browns saying we're going to give him 6 games and see how he develops. This is a one-shot audition with his Cleveland future hanging in the balance. The Raiders' defense isn't elite. They're beatable. They're inconsistent. If there's ever a game where Shedeur can show something positive, this is it. But even a win might not be enough if the film looks ugly. Even a decent stat line might not save him if he looks lost in the pocket or confused by the defense. Because Clark's point throughout this entire debate is that Shedeur isn't being judged on results alone. He's being judged on process, on how he looks, on whether he passes the eye test. And that's a standard that's almost impossible to quantify, but incredibly easy to fail. The countdown is ticking. Sunday is coming, and Shedeur Sanders is about to face the harshest truth Ryan Clark learned years ago when he was fighting for his own career. Nobody cares about your excuses. Nobody cares about your circumstances. The only thing that matters is whether you show up when it counts. This is his moment. This is his chance. And if he fails, there won't be any do-overs. Clark's message is clear. Play like your career depends on it, because it does.